go ahead and check out my other title called Last of Us 3. This one's called Storylines. Okay, so picking right back up, storyline number 10. I'm counting down. Idea number 10, I should say. So the idea that Ellie could just find purpose in her actions and become on a mission. Her mission would be to become part of the vaccine. That would be the entire mission. Okay, so by this point she's killed a lot of people, so I imagine there's still be people after her. So she'd have to fight her way back into a hospital to be like, hey, I'm actually peaceful right now. Put me on the table and kill me for this vaccine. And maybe even I would guess they try to find a way to do medical research, and you go through the game trying to graduate levels of medical research to help prevent her from dying from the procedure that would create a successful vaccine. Okay, a lot of variables there. So for it all to come to an end, by the way of her body finally being able to resist the cordyceps disease, it would really illustrate how the end of humanity is kind of imminent, being that she would now, in a way, it's like she would die from a cordyceps bite, technically. But at the same time, the vaccine, I don't know what they mean by a vaccine that turns the living zombies into humans, or it would make people not be infected by a bite. I still don't know, or both. So this idea would definitely be met with anger and rage from passionate fans, because, the types of people that play this game, they're not your typical snowflake that feels compelled by a vaccine as being this way to save humanity. No. So, what? Okay, yeah, sure. So much like Ellie's attempt at forgiving Joel was prematurely ended by his death, I think players would be left with nothing but loss and a complete destruction to the game's storytelling potential. If they do this, it would be a huge risk, but from a thematic, artistic, literary standpoint, it could be one of the most complex game stories to have ever existed. That would be a way of spinning it. I think it would just be a huge cop-out and trying to find a very inappropriate kumbaya ending to a post-apocalyptic world where it's still dreary. The hope is in, here we are, we made it, let's rebuild humanity. That's the ending it's supposed to be, not, hey guys, a vaccine saved us. That's not like, oh yeah, we got it to work. That's not going to compel people. So that's just one idea that they could use. All right, so okay, so now let's talk about number 9. Something about like an international response. Okay, so
how are we gonna handle Leah?
Oh, Leah's just a bad girl. They don't know. This is the middle of the story, by the way. So at the start of part 2 here, Abby and Owen, the bad guys, are discussing their journey from Seattle to Jackson. Okay, Owen makes a statement. Okay, so Abby and Owen are together. That's a whole thing. Owen makes a statement about traveling down to Mexico to visit Manny's hometown. This hypothetical raises the question about how other countries would have reacted to an outbreak, and a different climate could alter the behavior and evolution of the infected. So maybe if this was all set in a location such as Mexico City,
It wants to wrap itself around you.
I'm watching stuff that has an ad here. So set in a location like Mexico City, the overpopulation would mean the spread of infection would have been much higher, and a denser proportion of enemies would make for a much more challenging gameplay. So that part's good. In the storyline, due to the new location of, say, the Fireflies, perhaps an expedition into another country would be valid for the organization's survival. So not only that, but if they were to join a pre-existing organization in Mexico, they could have access to possibly better qualified surgeons and virologists who could finally help rid the world of this living zombie cordyceps disease. So again, you know, if they just throw out the word vaccine and just get rid of vaccine, you know, I don't think people respond very well to vaccine, you know, I mean, because, for example, I would want to sell a video game to all people that they would like. So, you know, to the people that have gotten, say, over $4.6 billion worth in vaccine injury or death judgments, I would want them to buy my game. They would not buy my game if it was all contingent upon a vaccination, but say a medical procedure, but with awesome gameplay, more challenging gameplay, that might actually be well received. So that's just kind of the international idea that I was kind of going with right there. So there is that. Let's see here. That's my knife. Let's get out a gun, shall we? Let's use a shotgun with one bullet. I got one bullet. Here we go. Yay, good stuff. Okay, so 8. Storyline number 8. Ellie finds purpose. Alright, so part 2, it really ends without any real conclusion. Joel's dead. Most of Ellie and Abby's friends are either dead. This is Abby right here, by the way. No, this is not Abby. Sorry, my mistake. Abby's the bad girl who Ellie lets go in the end. You know, after, yeah. So most of Ellie and Abby's friends are either dead, or they're just no longer willing to, or able to fight. And Ellie is left, you know, with cut off fingers, and she's left without any real cause. She can't even play the guitar the same anymore. So by the time part 3 comes around, Ellie may have been able to direct her efforts towards a greater purpose. And no, I don't mean like taking up painting and watercolors. You know, we all know that the third act, it must return to motivations. We would know that part 3 would have to return to motivations of the first. Part 1, okay? And Ellie could finally be on track to making her immunity mean something, okay? That is her dilemma. She's got no purpose, she's got nothing going on, and it just needs to mean something. So if the Fireflies have reestablished themselves as a powerful unit, Ellie may be inclined to reconnect with them to determine whether a vaccine could finally be made. Yeah, there's that vaccine word again, you know. So now, in this 8th storyline idea, if Abby and Lev, okay, these bad guys, if Abby and Lev were successful in their efforts to discover the freedom fighters, this could lead to another showdown between both protagonists of part 2. Okay, so this time they would be forced, though, to put aside their history to save the world. This would have been cool if they joined together in part 2. I'm kind of backtracking here. It would have been cool if Ellie finds the bad girl, Abby, and they start fighting, and they're amazing together. They save each other's lives. They get through each other's personal gropes, you know, but without ever finding out, you know, that Ellie comes from Joel, who killed Abby's dad, the surgeon, and before Ellie finds out that Abby's actually trying to find Joel to kill him. Okay, so before they even find those things out about each other, that would have been cool if they joined forces, and then later the player would have been torn about feeling anything bad about the bad girl's death, you know. So right, but I digress though. So in part 3, this storyline would have them come together, have to put their aside their differences, you know, to save the world. So given the personalities of these characters, it is unlikely to be easy, and a narrative revolving around the lack of trust between Ellie and Abby, it could make for an engaging conclusion to the series. But, you know, there need to be more to it than just their drama, you know. I feel like from a literary standpoint, it still could be weak, and it just would need a whole lot more. It might be, set in Mexico City, where Ellie's even made to actually seek refuge in the development of Abby's side with Manny's hometown and this and that, and but then Ellie would have to have pull of her own, not just be forced along to go a certain way, because she wouldn't do that. Ellie's very headstrong. She's very FU kind of mentality. It could be interesting, but that's just an idea. So that is the 8th idea, where Ellie just finds purpose. So yeah, so on to the 7th idea for a story. I want to do something here. Okay. I can't play this game and talk at the same time. Oh, yeah, sure.
How do we get through here? Okay, this way. Think we should head down there.
Oh, there's more stuff? I need more stuff. Okay. Anyway, okay, so... Oh yeah, that's right, we had to go this way. Oh yeah, I think there's a dumpster thing here. Wait, she said it was this way. Okay. Gotcha. Alright, anyway, so can I just jump down this? Just jump down it? Is it that easy? Oh. Yeah, it is. Okay, cool.
I can still kind of see the buildings.
Yeah, they're right in front of us.
Where do you want to go?
I can still kind of...
Let's see.
Alright, so number 7 would be, I think, would be where Abby and Lev become fireflies, okay? So instead of Ellie having to, join their mission, we're in a area where you actually need Abby, you need the bad side to complete your purpose of, your mission of purpose. It could be the other way around in number 7, the 7th idea here, that Abby and Lev become fireflies. So after Ellie released the 2, okay, that little boy person, in the conclusion of the game, Abby and Lev, they board a small boat and they disappear into the fog, right? So from their earlier appearance in the game's final chapter, it's quite clear that they are attempting to find the fireflies. However, it's never confirmed that they do. So once the game has been completed, the menu screen alters from that of a rowing boat, right, hitched to a rotten post, amidst that thick fog, to the same boat now moored on Catalina Beach. Okay, so that you could look at that as like an Easter egg. So it's speculated that this area is a meeting point for wayward fireflies, and it's meant to offer a glimmer of hope that Abby and Lev finally made it, because they're looking for fireflies. So, but what is in Catalina? Alright. Let's just go over here so I can talk. I can't possibly do combat and talk here. This part's so cool, though. Okay, so what's in Catalina once they make it? After the constant battles throughout Abby and Lev's story, it could not be this easy. They would have to... What is she doing? Okay, anyway. Gosh. So they would have to prove themselves to the fractured unit, as well as assist them in thriving once again. So not only that, but given the organization of the Rattlers in Santa Barbara, it wouldn't be a stretch to imagine there are more barbaric groups in other pockets of California. Okay? So an episode which focuses on the reformation of the Fireflies would be a great introduction to part 3. So not the full story, but definitely a relevant chapter in establishing that there are greater threats, and stuff like that. So storyline idea number 6 as we count down to number 1. What if we find out who tipped off Abby about Joel's whereabouts. Right? All we know is that she was tipped off by his whereabouts. How? Okay, so what if there's a little bit of 1.5 story connecting, parts 1 and 2 to conclude part 3 here? So the largest plot hole in Last of Us Part 2 was how Abby and the Wolves, WLF, knew the location of Joel and Jackson. That's pretty convenient. Okay, the story writer, when you hear him on YouTube, he's like, oh, I wrote it this way because that's what life is like in a third world country, and it's just forcing the U.S. comfortable people to understand, like realities, and so that's just what it was like. I definitely think it was a cop-out. He's trying to make the reasoning for his story, and everybody does this. He's trying to make the reasoning for his story sound really cool. Like, oh man, there's this great story writer. He's from the thick of it, in a third world country of conflict and, post-apocalyptic feeling. But really, in the end, the dude just had a social justice narrative that he forced down our throats and rushed through what could have been a compelling story of having Abby and Ellie meet first, spend a good 10 hours doing some amazing stuff together, making us feel connected to Abby, like, oh wow, great, and then being like, boom, bombshell, she's the daughter of that surgeon that Joel killed in part 1. Whoa, shock moment. But no, they don't do that. They just expect us to have this I understand both sides now opinion, and it just, no, it's terrible. So here's the thing. Given Abby's history as being part of the Fireflies, okay, this could be really rich. It's plausible that Abby still had many contacts from the fractured freedom fighter organization. Not only that, but Tommy was an ex-Firefly too, who may have stayed in contact with other members. So it's not a stretch to believe, given how Tommy just expertly and stealthily just gave away who they were. Oh, hey guys, yeah, how you doing? Yeah, I'm Tommy. We actually have great amounts of food and people to help you about 3 hours down the hill that way. Yeah, yep, that's who we are. Oh, by the way, we have patrols 8 at night time around 12 to 2. Like, I'm exaggerating, but he basically gave away the farm and it made no sense. He all of a sudden went from expert to downright trusting noob in a survivor setting, and it was very annoying to watch that unfold in part 2 here. Earlier than this moment in the game. So, but anyway, Tommy was an ex-Firefly who may have stayed in contact with other members, so it's not a stretch to believe that he could have inadvertently been in contact with whoever revealed the whereabouts of his wanted brother. Okay, so regardless of his contacts, Tommy comes across as cautious, and knowing his brother's last interaction with the Fireflies, Joel, I'm talking about Joel here. Tommy knowing Joel's last interaction with the Fireflies, it seems most unlikely he would give up that information easily. So Tommy's own desire for revenge gives further weight to argue against his participation in Joel's death. But that's but in a way that can be circular of an argument too. He didn't want to give up his brother, but his brother didn't die yet, so he probably didn't see the harm in maybe talking with the Firefly contact. So the only other ex-Firefly who was explicitly stated to have been in Jackson was the recently deceased weed farmer Eugene. So when stumbling across Eugene's weed stash on a patrol earlier, Dina right here, that's Dina, okay, Dina and Ellie here, come across his old Firefly dog tags indicating his former allegiance to the freedom fighter movement. Now, additionally, these two girls, okay, this pair here, they discovered an aged letter of the recently deceased Eugene with his wife and daughter. In the letter, Eugene's wife, Claire, begs him to not join the Fireflies. They don't just write these letters in the game for no reason, guys. They're giving history. They're doing Easter eggs. They're showing more to the story that drives the plot of Part 2 here. But everything of history has a backstory and something that can always be continued upon. Okay? So, in the letter, Eugene's wife Claire begs him to not join the Fireflies. It is evident that he disregards his wife's wishes, and the fate of his family are still unknown. Okay, so in the photograph that came with that letter, we see Eugene and Claire and their unnamed daughter. Is Eugene's daughter Nora? It could be Nora. Okay, one other interesting aspect from this quiet before the storm section of the game, Ellie writes in her journal, she writes, was Eugene in touch with other Fireflies? That was important enough for Ellie here to put in her journal that's in her backpack. This simple journal entry begs the question, did Eugene tip off the WLF wolves that Joel was in Jackson? What would that ultimately do? We find out who tipped off Abby about Joel's whereabouts. So there could be dissension among the last bits and pieces of the Fireflies. We could combine this with the idea that, Abby and Lev go to reestablish the Fireflies, and then still bent on vengeance, though, and even purpose, Ellie could then reconnect with Abby at Catalina Beach. But actually no, Abby could find Ellie first. They could reconnect, establish their differences, right? Kind of find peace. But a good literary element is when something throws something in the gears to ruin that. Is that Abby says, yeah, I put together, a new crew to help. They're in Catalina Beach. And so Abby then shows up and realizes that it's Fireflies, and she's still wanting to have purpose, feels that spark of revenge come up and be like, oh, what the heck, Fireflies? These are the people that tipped off. She could just assume and be mad. These are the people that tipped off Joel's whereabouts in the first place. She gets re-sparked in anger about Joel's death and the fact that Abby, right in front of her, killed Joel in Part 2. In front of Ellie. She could have flashbacks again, and they could have conflict that would, of course, be temporary. But there's a lot of literary elements of not just, okay, you're forgiven, but the next day you can still struggle over the memories. It's still a struggle. Forgiveness can be a struggle, and it can really rear up on bad days, especially with new information. Okay, so anyway, storyline number 5 idea. Abby and Owen's journey to Seattle. In Part 2, we are given a fair amount of backstory for Abby. Not only do we play as the character while she was a teenager with her father in Salt Lake City, but we also see the evolution of her relationship with Owen in Seattle. Okay, so it's clear that after the dissolution of the Fireflies in Utah, many of the young recruits fled to Washington State. That also explains how Nora ended up with the WLF. But Salt Lake City to Seattle is still an 800-mile plus journey. And one which in the apocalypse would be riddled with grave obstacles and countless infected. Okay? The infected, they don't like to just hang out around humans. They like to just conquer an area and roam about it. So to further add weight behind Abby's backstory, as well as provide more of a significance to Owen's character, an interquel could be a good route to take. The idea of a part 2.5 to a part 3, or a 1.5 to 2.5 kind of sequel. So Abby, the thing about that though is that Abby has been such a divisive character, it seems unlikely that Sony would wager that much into a single game of the popular series, especially if they're going to just have us all waste our time playing as Abby for a whole entire game. That would be annoying. Nobody would want to play it. You know, they'd have to do completely much more to make that interesting. So yeah. So storyline number 4. The Seraphites, those Native American type people, they are a tremendous addition, huge, brand new to the Last of Us series. As opponents, their calm and collected patrols are very troublesome, and their whistle communication adds an eeriness to the game, which proves that humans can be just as chilling as the infected. We are treated to a great deal of insight from the followers of the religion, but we only hear about its inception. All we know is that the prophet saved countless lives and died before the events of the sequel. Oh, and she had scars at either side of her lips, which would then become a self-sacrifice rite of passage for the religion's followers. So, a game that explores the beginning of this religion would be a great way of bolstering the lore from the franchise, as well as adding further insight into the often misunderstood cult. A Seraphite origin story would work best in a story which also details the rise of the wolves in Seattle. Again, this is still, you know, exploring backstory routes, ideas, and again, doesn't really provide any sort of conclusion that we would need, you know, to really feel good about the game itself. So there is that. Okay, so storyline idea number 3 as we count down to 1 here of 10 ideas. The Seattle Civil War. When exploring Seattle, there is much information about the Civil War which occurred between the feuding wolves and Seraphites. Both groups were born out of a lack of faith in Fedra. Okay, basically like FEMA. Okay, they're both born out of a lack of faith in Fedra responses to the outbreak, and both tribes believe that their methods of saving humanity are better than the other. An entire game dedicated to the Seattle Civil War would be like a great exploration into the murky morality plays within that they're trying to go for the Last of Us universe. Okay, the morality. They advertised that this part 2 game was like, oh yeah, it really makes you torn about, you know, doing certain things. Oh wow. Doing certain things against them. And so, but really, I was not torn. It was very clear which moral side was the correct one. It just didn't baffle me at all. So with such a clear division between camps, a Civil War game could be the answer to the franchise's online gaming question. An online game is due to be released at some point within the next year. That's a fact. So with the original game's factions MP, a focus on WLF and Seraphites could reintroduce this mode, but as a standalone game, it could be much more expansive into the origins, similarities, and of course the differences between the two warring tribes of Seattle. Focusing on these 2 units, players could learn tactics unique to each respective camp and competitively have their ethics questioned. Okay, so that, I think that would actually create the moral ambiguity that the game was trying to go for, but totally failed at doing. They did a good job at giving a backstory, but at best, all we know is that the enemy heard very, very one-sided stories that if you're trying to create moral ambiguity, you would actually make it to where Joel and Tommy did some stuff wrong. That not just add in some bad things they did in flashback sequence. I'm talking like things that we saw in part 1. We would have to see proof that Joel and Tommy didn't tell the whole story of what we experienced and attacked ourselves when we played the game. Even details that were there. They can't invent brand new details. They have to use details that were there that prove that Joel had Ellie, you know, support and do some pretty bad things that were without question wrong. But in the end, that's the moral ambiguity. Joel still saved Ellie's life, and that's, yeah. But they didn't do that. Not at all. Not even close. Storyline number 2, okay, is one where I'll call it Ellie altering to life in Jack.